Lake Forest podcast is supported by viewers, listeners, and businesses just like you. Looking for the best pool supplies? Look no further than Dohany's Pool Supplies. With a history dating back to 1967, this family-owned business offers everything families need to keep their pools clean and sparkling, from chemicals to equipment. Plus, customers enjoy free shipping on all orders. Visit Dohany's Pool Supplies today at doheny.com, DOHENY.com, to learn more. Forest Bluff Real Estate Team serves Illinois, Wisconsin, Lake Forest, and Lake Bluff. John Josephitis, Laura Lee Van Fleet, and of course Michelle Parnell. Get a free market analysis now at forestbluffrealestate.com. For the best cannabis in the world, look no further than Iliad Epic Grow. Owned by Lake Bluff's own Rich Ruzich, they are a cannabis cultivation center focusing on hard-to-find small batch products that will delight both the occasional user and ganjier. When visiting Michigan, ask for it by name. Epic Products, exceptional process. For more information, email info@iliadgrow.com. Havey Communications has been helping first responders arrive safely since 1983. It's owned by Lake Forest's own Mike Havey. Check them out at haveycommunications.com. We'd also like to say we're thankful for our Patreon supporters: Costa, Lance, Otto, RDM, John C., and Helen. Shout out to the Lake Forest Breakfast Group, Broad Stop and Captain Mike's in Kenosha, the Greentown Tavern, and the Frolic Lounge in Waukegan. Welcome to the Lake Forest Podcast, a podcast about the lovely city of Lake Forest, featuring topics like local news, sports, music, people, food, and history. My name is Pete, and I'm joined with my fine co-host, Lake Forest history legend, Arthur Miller. We all live in Lake Forest. Before we start our class, we have a sponsor for the show, Dakota Insurance Group. They've got your back. Why? Because that's what friends are for. Dakota Insurance Group handles all your residential and commercial insurance needs. Get a quote now at dakotaInsuranceGroup.com. Okay, one of the goals of the podcast is for listeners to learn just a little bit more about Lake Forest. Well, who better to teach us about Lake Forest history than our own Lake Forest history legend, Arthur Miller. Okay, everyone, take your seats, fold your hands, put them on top of the desk. Our class is about to begin. Hey, Art, how you been?
Just fine, thank you. How are you?
Oh, we're going to have a good one. We had Commander McClinlock Post 264 yesterday talking to us about Lake Forest Day. And I saw him reading. He had his book up, and sure enough, I think it was one of your books, Arthur.
Could have been this one.
I think it was.
Yeah, this is one put out by the History Center, predecessor Historical Society. It was done for their centennial of the Lake Forest Day in 1908 to 2008. It's got lots of stuff in it and fascinating to look at. And I'm just going to add a few little nudges.
Well, of course you are. I mean, he brought that book out. I'm like, we can't just have 2 minutes talking about your book. We need the whole show, Art. So feel free. Where did Lake Forest Day come from? Who started it?
So the book gives a credit to a couple of different organizations in the early 20th century that helped get the thing started. Lake Forest is a fascinating little town. Started in the 1850s. It was mostly centered on the schools. There were schools, private prep schools and a college that were out here, and kids from the city came out to go to school here. Then their families followed them, and the original people who lived here, built the earlier houses, were all year-round people. They came for the whole year. What happened was that as the town grew by the mid-1890s and started to spread out, a new group of people came out that wanted their cake and eat it too. They wanted to be living in the city. They had big townhouses on Astor Street, Lakeshore Drive, Prairie Avenue, et cetera, et cetera. And they came out here, especially as the Stockyards got really going. They came out here to get away from the stink when they opened their windows. Now, from mid-April to early November, if you opened your windows, in might come some of this not too pleasant odor.
Yeah.
So they were living out here. They were trying to be active. Theodore Roosevelt, the president, who was going to be president in the early 1900s, he was in favor of an active life. People should not just sit around. Office people would become nervous wrecks, spending all their time in the office. In 1894, they started giving people the Saturday afternoons off to come out and play golf. They couldn't play golf on Sunday because you weren't supposed to do anything on Sunday. You were supposed to just think about religion and stuff like that. And you could go to a couple times to church and stuff like that, but they were very strict about that. So Saturday afternoon was time for that. So people started building houses out here that were seasonal. Basically, they weren't insulated a whole lot. They were meant to be for their summer or seasonal living. So what happened was they started to be the local industry. The rich people, the estate owners, were the local industry, and it started developing. The town started to develop a whole group of people who served this rich people industry. Their horses, all the different kinds of things they liked. And so what happened was, by 1900, you had a pretty substantial population developing along Westminster, west of Western Avenue, going up Summit a little bit, over north of, going up on McKinley, going on Scott Street, things like that. What they did was they were able to build these houses. As these people developed, they had their own houses here. They would go back into town in November, especially in election season. They would vote in Chicago. So who stayed out in Lake Forest and voted? The gardeners, the people working in the grocery store, and stuff like that. By 1900, after the 1894 railroad strike, Eugene Debs was, he was locked up for a while for having instigated that strike. And he decided he'd run for president in 1900. So then in 1904, he ran again. And by 1905, they began to notice that maybe Lake Forest couldn't really work that well if the only people voting in Lake Forest were voting for labor, voting on the socialist ticket. So they probably determined, by coincidence, in 1905, they started something called the Young Men's Club. There was also a women's club that got going in that period. Young Men's Club was there, and then by 1906, they purchased some property over on Green Bay Road by West Park and had Howard Van Doren Shaw set up a little community there. And they were going to build middle-class houses for people who worked in town, to not have just people who worked on estates, but to have business owners and to have people have a vested interest to become more identified with people who own property. That developed. And so by 1906, that was that. They sold the lots in 1907. People bought them. The only people who could buy it was members of this Young Men's Club. Speculators couldn't buy it. And then by 1908, they started the Lake Forest Day. Lake Forest Day was the townspeople's holiday. It was meant to bring solidarity. It was run kind of, or sort of supported by the estate people. The estate people wanted to encourage solidarity. They wanted to encourage patriotism. They wanted to encourage a group shared experience sort of thing. And basically they wanted to turn people into Republicans. Not socialists, but Republicans.
Yeah.
And indeed, there were several Republican county officials and stuff that lived in that neighborhood in West Park. Then other neighborhoods were developed in the teens. But the first Lake Forest Day was the year after they started setting up that middle-class development over on West Park. So what's interesting is Lake Forest Day became a rallying point. It was held on the Wednesday afternoon originally, when all the local businesses took off because they were open on Saturday. So they took off on Wednesday afternoon to have they could have their picnic or their activities. So the first one was held on campus at Lake Forest College. They had all the gardeners got together and they had a big flower show of what they'd grown and stuff. They had events that they ran at the college's football field, still there, Farwell Field. So they did activities for people, had picnics, people brought stuff, and it was a big event. And that's how it got started. It was kind of hit and miss in the early years. They had things happen like the pandemic, like we had last year, no Lake Forest Day, because
That's right.
yeah, they didn't have it during World War One because there was a war on. Then there was a flu epidemic and stuff. So it would get interrupted. But basically, year in and year out, with the backing of the merchants, but also the backing of the estate people, they would celebrate what it was to be part of Lake Forest, what it was for Lake Forest to be part of the United States, what it was to have flags. It was patriotic. It was supposed to be a bonding, shared experience for all the parts of the community. Kids of the wealthy people helped put on different things. We have a carnival now, but initially the carnival was sort of done by the kids themselves. And so they would put on a carnival for the townspeople. And it was a bonding sort of a thing between the different parts of the community. So that was its origins. It grew, it continued. It became a big parade they had a big parade in 1915. Then they started having parades again after in the 20s. By the 20s, the American Legion was involved in taking over and carrying it forward. And so it became self-sustaining. They raised money by appealing to the people, the estate people and everybody else. And they still do that. They write to everybody and ask them to contribute. You've probably gotten stuff in the mail, buy tickets, raffle tickets and stuff like that. And they would have fundraisers where they would sell those tickets. And initially they were giving out cars because by the 50s, people wanted to have cars, but everybody didn't have one. It was still kind of a hot thing to get a car. So that went on to the 70s and 80s, I think, when they actually gave away a car. Nowadays, people got a garage full of cars often, or not that many people want a car. And more significantly, slowly after the 50s and 60s, the original people who had been that townspeople group started to thin out. The people who worked in relatively lower paying jobs in town no longer could afford to live here. They were moving to other parts of Lake County because they had a car and they could have a cheaper house in Vernon Hills or Gurnee or something like that and come down and work. They wouldn't have to see the people that they were serving every day. So there were some good reasons why they moved out of town, but it didn't become as much of it became less of a thing for the old support community, the townspeople, and more of just a general thing for all the families that are around. Now, as you may have noticed, Lake Forest was really busy in June. It's still kind of busy, but it's not nearly as busy in July as it was in June. A lot of people are on vacation, and that'll continue into August. They'll be on vacation. They'll start to come back mid-August, for the kids to go to schools and stuff like that. But when they have Lake Forest Day is a time when a lot of the Lake Foresters, quote unquote, big, estate people will be out of it. They'd have gone to Maine. They would have gone to Martha's Vineyard. They'd have gone to upper Wisconsin, up on the Lake Superior shore of Lake Michigan, of Michigan, Upper Peninsula.
Right.
Get away from the heat. They also get away from the hay fever. That was a big thing. The people who were still here, they sort of then became the ones who were the ones who were carrying on all the activities. So it became a very nostalgic event, increasingly in that period. And so you see more and more, there were floats. They would make fancy floats like the Rose Bowl, even in the 40s and 50s. But it became more antique cars and sports cars and things like that, and a few politicians riding in the parade. People marching, summer camp kids marching, scout groups marching. In World War II, of course, there were two military installations on either side of Lake Forest. There was Fort Sheridan for the Army and Great Lakes for the Navy, and Marines. So you had, lots of parade possibilities from that. Not so much now. It's just different,
Weren't there more car dealerships in Lake Forest back then?
There were car dealerships, yes. There was a Ford, when we came here in the 70s, there was a Ford dealer, there was a Buick dealer, there was Chrysler dealer. Those were the kinds of cars that most people drove if they didn't drive a Mercedes. Now, the rich people in the 70s were not driving expensive cars. They were a little scared of what had been going on in Chicago, like we are now.
Yeah.
But they were real scared of the Black Panthers. And so people were very understated. They drove Chevys, Plymouth Valiants. You're too young to know about Plymouth Valiants, but they were little cars that,
I know Plymouth Dusters.
for people to they didn't want to stand out too much in that period. They didn't have any fancy cars. But the merchants drove around in the parade in historic vehicles, maybe even a horse and wagon, to kind of remind people of Lake Forest heritage of these parades, and a little bit nostalgic about when there was a real townspeople community here. They began to look back at, when it was a tight-knit little community. There were bowling alleys here. Can you imagine bowling alleys in Lake Forest?
Huh.
They were.
That's a good idea, Art.
Well, I know there were a few. There were bowling alleys, and there were lots of what we would call now working class kinds of entertainment. There was a movie house, and so the nostalgia for that kind of community thrived through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, I think. And you'll still see a few businesses that have old-time vehicles like they might have used in the early days that they'll drive in. And very interesting to see all the stuff that they have. There were all kinds of organizations marched. The Gardeners organization called the North Shore Horticultural Association, they marched in the parade. The Women's Club, Men's Club, the Legion, all these different people were doing things. In 1998, 1999, 2000, there was a big campaign to redo the park in Market Square, which had gotten kind of tacky, and run down. So they had a big fundraising drive, and the people who were running that were kind of, Anwensia people and stuff like that, Lake Forest Garden Club. So they marched in the parades at that point and tried to drum up support for funding and also just generally support for redoing Market Square. So it was a way to convince people in town to do things and to be on board and to build kind of a shared sense of community. They would advertise the library book sale every September. They'd be in the parade. The Lake Forest Day idea morphed over time. Initially, this is my theory. Initially, it was to broaden the middle class character of Lake Forest, to get people so they identified with one Lake Forest it had some people that were really wealthy, some people who were not so wealthy, and then a bunch of people in the middle. And that was initially, I think, the idea. And it was pretty successful in that way. It became increasingly something that was generally a big item for people who lived here that weren't either at the top or the bottom of the thing through the middle of the 20th century. And then later, just everybody who moved into town who happened to not be on vacation on April 3rd or whatever, 2nd or whatever day it takes place, is first Wednesday in August. Everybody would be involved, would participate. It used to be that the mayor held a reception for all of the sort of not-for-profits in town, the organizations that contributed to making the town better. I don't know if they're still doing that, but that was part of it, to encourage all these groups. They were marching in the parade, but also to consider themselves part of the larger picture in Lake Forest. They're all contributing to one kind of idea. I don't know what they do about that now, if they've kind of moved away from that or not, but there was an idea of bringing everybody together, making it fun, It's lower keyed than the 4th of July in Lake Bluff, for instance, which is a much more broadly based kind of a thing.
Right.
But because it's, for one thing, it's in the morning on a Wednesday, which is not exactly, and it's not a holiday. So it doesn't get a lot of people who are in Chicago or even in working at home, they've got who are on deadlines and stuff like that. So people who are working on a Wednesday may not show up, but kids, moms, families, teenagers.
That was the feedback I got, Art, where people will ask me, well, why is it on a Wednesday? Why can't it be on a weekend? And that just goes to the earlier.
It was the local business people. Yeah, right.
Yeah. It costs more to do it on a weekend than in a weekday too. And
does it really? Okay.
Well, yeah, when you get the rides and all that, because
the
Legion has to pay for everything or take the risk. And I was going to ask you, the Legion has taken on a lot of things. There's a lot more veterans back then. I mean, they're hurting right now for volunteers for the beer and corn tent and whatnot. And also getting membership at the Legion. If we didn't have the Legion, where would we be, Art? Right?
Well, they've certainly been important for 100 years. I mean, 1921 is when they got kind of organized. They're kind of a backbone of the community, and the whole patriotic idea and the idea of one shared common idea in trouble right now. We've noticed that nationally and everything. People don't all identify with the same thing. And so it takes work to get people to be, to put aside their issues, which are real, but to focus on the fact that, our town is special, it's unique, it's got remarkable range of kinds of people here. Yeah, the Legion, why there aren't more people? Well, for one thing, to move to Lake Forest, you got to have
money.
So some of these guys that have been to Afghanistan and Iraq, they may be in where they're trying to make some money. They may have gone to graduate school after that, and they may get into things. And there may be some quiet graduates like that have done that. Veterans, not graduates, but who've gone through the service, come out, gone into business, and they've moved to Lake Forest. They don't seem to they don't identify with the Lake Forest thing as much, Periodically, during the time I've lived in Lake Forest, they've worried about integrating new people into the town so that they feel like there's someplace, It's all one town. It's not, just your house and your neighbors, but you're part of a larger community. So,
well, like they do at the country clubs, maybe they could do a social membership, even though I'm not a veteran,
Yeah, right. You could be a friend of the Legion.
Right.
You could be a friend of the Legion. Why not?
Yeah.
Because the Legion is not political. It's people who've just basically served, some of the older ones, Uncle Sam sent them a letter they couldn't refuse. That was my generation,
Yeah.
In my case, I had bad eyes, so I couldn't serve, but a lot of people did serve, even if they didn't exactly understand. Well, they were kind of against what was maybe going on in Vietnam.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they didn't serve. So actually, if you serve, even when you don't necessarily agree, that's the height of patriotism, right? I mean, they did what was asked of them.
You get sent over there and you come back here and you get treated like crap. I can't only imagine. I mean, that's getting on another issue, Art, but
no, but I mean, it's a serious point, and it does honor people who have served their country. We seem to have, sticky feet that keep getting stuck in different places in the world, Then we send people over there and we don't really give them a clear idea of how they're supposed to keep from getting killed. And it's difficult. I don't know, there's no right answer to it. Vietnam was a really remarkable experience. And people who served later in Vietnam, toward the 70s and stuff, they were part of what was the most remarkable withdrawal. 500,000 people were withdrawn from Southeast Asia over in a gradual way over a period of time with minimal casualties. I'm not saying nobody died. There were
Right.
probably lots of people died and got injured, but it's amazing that 1 million people didn't get massacred, or something over there. And so they knew that it was a losing thing, and yet they were part of it, and they were part of the biggest mass retreat. And it is a retreat, but a retreat isn't necessarily dishonorable. They were part of this huge retreat, and people didn't appreciate it when they got home. Right.
And the veterans, I mean, they fund the Legion.
Yeah.
You have less veterans, or
And
they're not, and they work, right? So, it just we're gonna have to populate the Legion somehow. We're not going to have Lake Forest Day. I don't hear anybody talking about it, but with the restaurant work, you can't get any employees.
Nobody anywhere. I don't know where everybody went, but all of a sudden we got nobody. And, you just can't get stuff done. It's true.
It's the pandemic. I mean, you got to let that money run out, and then people have to work. That's another topic, Art. I'm not going there. I can already see the email bin filling up. Ding, 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 ding. So, we have all kinds of dislocations now.
Certainly the Legion needs support, and I think some kind of an auxiliary group of friends of the Legion would be one way to handle it. But people like Larry Crone, for instance, who's I think he's ill now, but for years, and he walked with a limp. I don't know if that was from his service or not, but he would take his truck and he would go around and put up the flags. That's in the book, that I'm talking about.
Right.
There's a picture of him with his truck putting up flags all over town. He did that all the time. He was a real service-oriented kind of a guy. Bud Turner just passed away this last month. He was one of the leaders of that group, and at least his obit online basically says, he had been one of the people affected by Agent Orange in Vietnam. He was a medic.
Yeah.
He then raised his oldest son. His son became a captain in the Navy. I'm not sure how high he rose, but he was running things and ships and stuff like that, and is now with the National Security Agency, the NSA. He's working for them. So it's a family patriotic thing, and for our community, how do we pass on generations like some families do to have support? Somebody else has to take it over, and people have to think of volunteerism as part of what the town does. Now, Boy Scouts, they got their problems.
I don't think it's not called Boy Scouts anymore.
What's it called?
Scouts.
Oh, okay, Scouts.
I believe that's what it is. That's what Commander told me yesterday. So I'm just saying that's kind of where we're at on these things. Those are the volunteers that help with the flags and whatnot. And he corrected me on the name of it. And
it's a good experience for kids to learn service.
Yep.
You can support your community without, you don't have to be some kind of rich person or fancy leader to be a major factor in your community. There's people that gave big money to build a hospital and stuff like that. But there's also a lot of people who just year in and year out, or holiday after holiday, contributed to the community.
Well, I think they got to take that post and make it like all the other ones. We can go in and have a draft beer and tavern pizza and pull tabs. We might have to get something like going at the McClinlock Post.
You have to get them a license.
Well, hey,
this is Lake Forest, remember.
If you can't take care of the vets, who are you going to take care of, Art, right?
Well, no, I'm not arguing with you, but I'm just
saying, I know.
There are costs, there's everything. That Lake Forest is not the easiest place to set up a saloon.
Well, it would be in a veterans watering hole. We'll figure out how to do it, Art.
No, I agree. I think that would be a nice thing, and it would also encourage people to think about how they can volunteer in the community.
Maybe they got to move that post again, or have another, a West Side Post.
Most of the density's in the east, though. I'm out on the west side now in what I call East Mattawa. But I mean,
Yeah.
you got the tighter neighborhoods over there, and
Yeah.
people can walk to town around in that area. So,
All right. Well, maybe we'll get something going here, Art.
yeah.
I lost track of everything that we were talking about.
Well, we're
Okay.
talking about Forest Day. Yeah.
Wednesday. Okay. It's the first Wednesday in August. I got
Yep.
that down. And it's called Lake Forest Day, but it lasts more than one day. I got confused on
Yes.
that.
Tuesday night, and then there's
Tuesday and Wednesday.
Tuesday and Wednesday, and then there's associated picnics, and there are groups that have their reunions. Different groups have reunions. High school groups have your reunions. So it's a big holiday that brings people together. So it's great. And I just have one more story after the last one. It has to do with the book that was done by the Historical Society, which was the predecessor of the History Center. They did it in 2008 for the 100th anniversary of Lake Forest Day, which had started at Lake Forest College. The book shows a picture of an elephant, or a couple of pictures of an elephant in 1993.
Okay.
They said there had been 2 other times when there were elephants. That, however, was the only time I was ever involved with the elephant. The Rotary Club brought the elephant to the fair, arranged to have it go, and it was a big success. As a relatively not central member of that organization, I was assigned to one of the most interesting jobs you can have with an elephant, following along behind with a shovel and a wagon.
Sound like me and Scoo.
It was a memorable occasion, And you wouldn't believe how that large animal really processed a lot of material onto the pavement. So that was a memorable time for me. But it was a big success, and people could ride on them. You know, probably now they'd have half the county people who are anti-cruelty to animals. You know, all over them like a cheap suit. You know, but back then it wasn't so sensitive, and it wasn't so clear that the animal was not happy. He seemed perfectly happy to munch along. He was tame, and he munched, and he processed food on a regular basis. And a few kids climbed on top and stuff, but that he didn't seem to be disrupted by that. I don't know if the keeper fed him phenobarbital or anything, but it'd take quite a bit to slow that thing down.
Well, I was wondering how long it would take for us to talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah. Right. So that's my last Lake Forest Day story, because that was but the picture struck me about the elephant and reminded me of the whole thing.
The Lake Forest Podcast is supported by viewers, listeners, and businesses just like you. Looking for the best pool supplies? Look no further than Dohany's Pool Supplies. With a history dating back to 1967, this family-owned business offers everything families need to keep their pools clean and sparkling, from chemicals to equipment. Plus, customers enjoy free shipping on all orders. Visit Dohany's Pool Supplies today at doheny.com, DOHENY.com, to learn more. Forest Bluff Real Estate Team serves Illinois, Wisconsin, Lake Forest, and Lake Bluff. John Josephitis, Laura Lee Van Fleet, and of course, Michelle Parnell. Get a free market analysis now at forestbluffrealestate.com. For the best cannabis in the world, look no further than Iliad Epic Grow. Owned by Lake Bluff's own Rich Ruzich, they are a cannabis cultivation center focusing on hard-to-find small batch products that will delight both the occasional user and ganjier. When visiting Michigan, ask for it by name. Epic Products, exceptional process. For more information, email info@iliadgrow.com. Havey Communications has been helping first responders arrive safely since 1983. It's owned by Lake Forest's own Mike Havey. Check them out at haveycommunications.com. We'd also like to say we're thankful for our Patreon supporters, Costa, Lance, Otto, RDM, John C., and Helen. Shout out to the Lake Forest Breakfast Group, Broad Stop and Captain Mike's in Kenosha, the Greentown Tavern, and the Frolic Lounge in Waukegan.